Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2013 science fiction film Ender's Game. Now, Ender's Game is, in my opinion, a underrated gem. I have always liked this film ever since I first saw it in the theater, and each time that I watch it, it still holds up relatively well. I do have some issues with it, some things that prevent it from being a great movie or an instant classic, but I still think for what it is, it's a rather solid and spectacular at times science fiction film. Yes, I've heard the novel is better. I haven't read the novel yet. One of these days I would definitely like to, but even if I was a fan of the novel, I would still be a fan of the film because I've always been one of those people that tends to give a film adaptation of a novel a little more leeway than others. Because I don't feel it's fair to judge a film adaptation of a novel so harshly just because of the fact that it's not like the novel or it's not as good as the novel. Because novels don't have the same limitations that a film does. Novels don't have to deal with the same budget constraints. Novels don't have to deal with the same constraints when it comes to the style of storytelling, whether it's how it elongates or handles its character development or other arcs of the story. It can take its time more in ways that films cannot. Films can't afford to spend that much time laboring on extraneous subplots or character development. They only have 2 to 2.5 hours to tell their story. So, I've never been one of those that's been like, this film sucks because it's not like the book. I think that's a little too harsh. And you can definitely prefer the book and so on, but if you think it sucks on its own merits, that's one thing, but if you think it just sucks because it's not like the book, I think that's unfair. I really honestly do. Now, I know that might be a little controversial for some, but I think it's something that should be discussed more and people should talk about it more because books are a different medium of storytelling with different rules and regulations versus a film adaptation. That's just a fact. And also for a lot of people, the version of the story, the interpretation of the novel in their head is better than any movie ever could be. So the bar is already set stupendously high. And no wonder it doesn't get over that bar, if that's the bar that people are setting when it comes to an adaptation of a novel. Now, the film is directed by Gavin Hood, and I think he did a great job. I really do. From a guy who directed X-Men Origins Wolverine in unspectacular fashion to direct a slick, stylish, incredible looking science fiction film with some really great grand moments of spectacle is quite the step up. I know I've heard people and critics say it looks cheap or it looks like a CW show or a TV movie. I didn't see that at all. I thought this film looked really good, especially when it comes to the sequences involving the battle training and zero gravity, or the sequences with the CGI animation, which are showcasing Ender's mind game. Also, the space battles. Majority of it was all in CGI, but the way that everything was set up was quite visually stunning. And speaking of visually stunning, the whole sequence where Ender has his encounter with the Formic Queen, like that scene is jaw-dropping in its scope and its genuine beauty. So yeah, Gavin Hood, I thought he did a great job. He worked well with his cast, and his actors. He brought a lot of passion to the project because you could tell that he was a fan of the source material and the story that he was telling, as well as the characters within it. And he set out to make a science fiction epic with a young adult twist, which is understandable since Ender's Game is a young adult novel. But because films like Hunger Games and Twilight and all these other young adult movies based on young adult novels had already been out in theaters, Ender's Game was in a lot of ways overshadowed. It was released at the wrong time. If this was a film that did ultimately get past its development hell earlier and was released in the 90s or in the 80s, the film would have been a lot more successful, critically and financially. But because of the fact that it was in 2013, a lot of people saw it as derivative without really honestly judging it fairly based on the fact that it's based on a novel that in a lot of ways predated things like Harry Potter or the Hunger Games or Maze Runner or Divergent or any of these other young adult franchises. It's kind of the same issue that John Carter ran into when that finally got made. A lot of people accused of it of being derivative and just more of the same, when John Carter of Mars was in a lot of ways the progenitor for a lot of these other science fiction films like it, that people considered to be more original or creative or inventive than John Carter. I know that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Gavin Hood's direction, but I just wanted to throw that out there because it's definitely something that did come to mind when it comes to Ender's Game, is the way that it was received. And it also does tie into Gavin Hood because Gavin Hood wrote the film. He wrote the movie, and I thought he did a really solid job writing the film as well, considering the fact that from what I've been reading, Ender's Game was in development hell for a long time because it was a difficult property to adapt on film. Because there's a lot of techno jargon, there's a lot of things that would alienate your average audience member. There's a lot of extraneous details. There's a lot of stuff that just was something that needed to be either excised or compacted to really ultimately create a more cohesive narrative that can be enjoyed or consumed by mass audiences. That's another thing that novels don't have to worry about. Novels can appeal to a core niche group of readers in ways that films can't. Films have to appeal to the widest audience possible because that's what they are intended to do. That's how they make profit. That's how they make money for the studio, is they do that very thing. So Gavin Hood was tasked with a really difficult job. He had to take the novel Ender's Game, he had to condense things down, he had to take some things that he considered to be extraneous, that other people, other fans of the book, probably wouldn't feel were actually extraneous, and then had to take them out and had to rearrange things, had to structure his version of Ender's Game in a way that is vastly different from the novel in terms of the way that the story plays out and the characters evolve and so on and so forth. And from what I've been reading about the novel versus the film, I think Gavin Hood actually did a really good job of maintaining the core and the spirit of the novel while still doing his own adaptation of it and making it more filmic instead of set up and structured like a novel, which is also another thing that is different between a novel and a film. A novel is set up differently in terms of how things go from one place to the next. So a film really has to take a different approach in how it does that. And sometimes it can be to a genuine amount of praise, or it can be to a genuine amount of derision because of the fact that it tries to do too much. That's something that I notice a lot of these film adaptations doing of novels. They throw in too many things. They cram too much into one movie because of the fact that they have to change the story and make it into something that can be consumed as a cohesive whole. And as a result, there's a lot of puzzle building. There's a lot of moments where you have to take some pieces and you got to fit them in a certain way. And sometimes it's a different way than the writer might have intended in terms of the writer of the source material. And there's just a lot of tough decisions that have to be made. And I think Ender's Game, for the most part, when it comes to the size and the scope of the story, when it comes to a lot of the different ways that it handles its characters and ultimately its finale and its messages, I think the script by Gavin Hood is solid, but it does have its issues. And really a lot of that stems from this cramming mentality that a lot of these writers feel like they have to have when it comes to their film adaptation. And Ender's Game is no different than any other adaptation in that regard. And what really suffers is Ender as a character, because his evolution as a character isn't fast forward. It doesn't feel like things stick or resonate with the audience as strongly as they should, because of the fact that everything is just happening one scene after another. He's in this group, and then he's in the next group, and then he's in the next one after that. And it just seems like it's one of those things where the script cuts some corners to just get to the finish line, so it's not as satisfying as I think it really could have been. It really could have benefited from taking a breather more, or letting things sink in more, or having Ender have more moments where he failed, because that makes it so Ender at times is not really the most relatable character. And I can understand why some people find Ender to be kind of an annoying character because of the fact that he's so smug and he always seems to get his way and he's always good and he just keeps getting better and it doesn't seem like it's really that much of a struggle for him. So I can see why people have an issue with the way that his character is written there. But I don't think it's necessarily an issue or a flaw with Ender the character himself. It's a flaw with the way that his character is written, due to the fact that all these different arcs have to be crammed, or Gavin Hood and the producers felt that they had to be crammed into one movie. So that's why everything is just in fast forward when it comes to his character development, or really any other characters. I mean, there's some characters that show up and show promise, but they're barely even in the movie. Mazer Rackham, for instance, is a big one. Shows up like 70 minutes into the film, and he only has like maybe 15-20 minutes of screen time, if even that. And of course the poster builds him up as like a big part of the film, but he's not really in it that much. And it's too bad, because it's a really interesting reveal, and the character is written in a way where I want to see more of this character, especially his interactions and his connection with Ender. But that's definitely not going to happen, because we're not getting another Ender's Game movie. And it's just one of those things where, with an adaptation of a novel, sometimes if the film doesn't do well, you're just kind of shit out of luck, because it's one of those things where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're damned if you have these elements in there sometimes, and then you're damned if you don't, because there might not be another chance. So it was a little clunky in terms of how they crammed everything together, but for the most part, it was still relatively seamless for me. It moved pretty quickly. I think the fact that it flowed pretty fast helped with the pacing. It was an issue with the character Ender, and it did prevent him from resonating more strongly with me, but it is also something that did help the film move along at a quicker pace. So it's one of those things where even that's not necessarily a net negative. It's just one of those things where it would have been nice to have the best of both worlds. That approach with a quicker pace, but maybe a couple more moments where Ender falters to kind of balance things out a little bit. But Ender, I'm focusing on Ender a lot because he's the main character. But the other characters, I thought Gavin did a good job bringing them to life, and Colonel Hiram Graff, I really did feel the script really nailed the aspect of his character where he's both a mentor, but he's both, in a lot of ways, kind of an antagonist. He's manipulative. He's not your typical good guy, so to speak. He has these different layers. Hailee Steinfeld's character Petra, I really like the stuff with her and Ender. I think there could have been more of that, though, to be honest. I think that's another thing that was sacrificed in terms of pacing, is really her arc as a character. She's there, and then she disappears, and then she's back again. The stuff with Bean was all right, but Bean is from what I've been reading, is a much stronger character. There's more to Bean in the novel, especially Ender's Shadow, because that's his story. So that was also just, it just felt like it's another similar thing to Petra. He's there, and then he disappears, and then he's back again for the final act. Bonzo, I think the way that character was written was decent. The issue I have with that character really doesn't have to do with the writing. It has to do with the casting, which I'll get to later. But for the most part, I do feel it's a solid script, despite some issues in terms of the way it handles the narrative, its characters, because it does have moments where it really does resonate strongly. The ending for me, I thought that was a really powerful ending. The setup with the training exercise that was actually the real thing, and a rather believable twist, because I could totally see some military power doing something like that, doing something shady like that, having these kids be a part of a training exercise, and it's their finals, so to speak, and everyone's watching them, but really what it is they're going into battle without them knowing. And a lot of people, and the military people, think it would be the best way to get it done, because there's no pressure. Like, there's pressure, but the pressure is not nearly the same as it would be if they knew that they were in real combat and there were real stakes, other than them being judged by their superiors, because it's a very different kind of stake. And the stuff with the Formic Queen, I love the way that that's written. I love that, where Ender goes to the Formic Queen's hive and has that moment with the queen and gets the baby, and essentially goes on his own mission to make up for the genocide of an entire race. I really thought that was quite poignant and powerful, and it was a nice way to cap off the story and the film. Now, I also felt the film had a really amazing cast for the most part, except for one glaring exception. Asa Butterfield, I thought he was awesome. I thought he did a really incredible job as Ender. He did a good job capturing the more intellectual aspects of this character, as well as the more sociopathic sort of stuff, because there are some genuinely scary aspects to this character. But that's one of the things that makes Ender interesting and an intriguing character to me, is that he's not goody two shoes. He's not perfect. He is kind of someone who has very clear sociopathic tendencies. So it's this kind of battle within himself to try to bring out more empathy. And I think that is something that really does come across with Asa Butterfield's performance. Definitely in the scenes that he shares with Petra, played by Hailee Steinfeld, who I also thought did a really stellar job in the few scenes that she was in. I thought she had some good chemistry with Asa, and overall, I thought she did a good job. Harrison Ford, I thought it was fantastic as Graf. I honestly think it's one of his better performances from this era of his career. He's kind of been known to kind of sleepwalk through a lot of stuff as of late, and I did not feel that way at all with this character. I really felt that he bought into it, being this mentor type, but also being, in a lot of ways, a master manipulator. And I definitely felt that he had some fun with that character, and it definitely did show on the screen. Viola Davis as Gwen, fine. Didn't seem like the character had a lot of focus. There wasn't a lot of scenes with that character, but she still had a certain presence to her that definitely did command a lot of respect, which is what you wanted from that character. Then we get to Ben Kingsley as a Mazer. And I thought for the most part he did a fine job playing the character and the little scenes that he was in, because Ben Kingsley is a good actor. I felt he was sufficiently motivated enough. He did a good enough job that I wanted to see more of this performance in a future film. And I get the controversy. A lot of people were upset because he's not Maori, so they would have liked to have seen a Maori actor, and I can see that. I mean, since this character isn't in the film a lot, they could have cast a Maori actor and given them a platform to provide more representation in that regard. And I'm pretty sure there was a strong enough Maori actor they could have cast who could have played that role fine enough and maybe made a name for themselves. So I think they probably should have cast a Maori actor, but they went Ben Kingsley because he was a name, someone to add to the poster to bring people into the theater. And that didn't really work because the film was a bomb. But it's one of those things where I understand the controversy. I would have preferred for them to go in that direction, to cast a Maori actor in that role, but what we have I'm still able to deal with and appreciate because Ben Kingsley did a good job. It's not like it was a bad performance by him. Abigail Breslin, she was okay as Valentine. I don't think it's necessarily her fault. I think a lot of it is due to the fact that her character was written in a way where she was a little too sugary sweet for my tastes, and she just delivered that. So I think it's not really due to her own limitations as an actress. Kind of feel the same way about Aramis Knight as Bean. He's likable. He has a certain amount of charm to him, but he's not that charismatic, and he's really not someone that commands the screen that much, especially not to the point where you think that he could carry his own story, which is what happened with Bean in Ender's Shadow, from what I've read, because he's the protagonist in Ender's Shadow. So it does seem like Bean is not really a character that pops compared to the source material from what I've seen in research. And I think that honestly is kind of due to Aramis Knight. Like, he's not bad, but he's not really that great either. He's just kind of in the middle. Feel the same way about Suraj Parthasarathy as Alal. or Alai, my bad. Moisés Arias, though, I thought was atrocious as Bonzo. That was just a absolutely pathetic and cringe-inducing performance. He really brought down every scene he was in because he was just not the right actor for that role. He's supposed to be this intimidating leader of this group of trainees, and there isn't a single intimidating bone in his entire body. He looks like someone I could kick through a field goal post. Every scene that he's in, he's got the stink face on, like he shat his pants, and it's just not a good casting choice. And I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe they cast him because of the fact he was in a Disney Channel show and he had an established fan base already. Okay, fine. But you could have cast someone else that had an established fan base in the young adult audience that actually looked intimidating. So, yeah, I wasn't a fan of Moisés Arias' performance as Bonzo. I thought it was pretty pathetic. The sequence involving him and Ender when they're supposed to get into a fight, it didn't have the right emotion that the scene was supposed to have, so it didn't have the same weight because it was just so laughable to see Moisés Arias try to play that kind of character. I get it. They're trying to play him against type. It did not work at all. Now, the film also featured a few other cast members. You had Khylin Rhambo played Dink, Connor Carroll as Bernard. Those two were okay, just like Aramis Knight and Suraj. The thing is with those characters, apparently in the novel they had much bigger roles. Here they are just kind of there. They're kind of along for the ride. They're just members of Ender's team, so to speak. I guess they were supposed to be friends, but I don't know. It just seemed like they were just kind of there. The performances weren't anything amazing or incredible across the board from those two. Nonzo Inozi, though, I really liked him as Sergeant Dapp. I liked his few scenes that he was in. He had a nice bit of charisma and a good sense of humor. The film also features some really just genuinely impressive and visually stunning cinematography by Donald McAlpine. This film looks great, especially in the scenes involving anything that has to deal with a more larger-than-life cinematic kind of sequence. Some of the shots on Earth, some of the space sequences, the way that the whole battle arena, so to speak, looks like during the battle training scenes or during the finale where they are having the simulation of a confrontation with the Formic army. Speaking of those kind of things, those scenes are elevated even further by the editing by Zach Steinberg and Lee Smith, who were a really good pair. They worked well with one another and really did a great job editing these more intense sequences throughout the film. The film also featured a score by Steve Jablonsky, and this is not one of his finest works. It's not bad, it's just very so-so. That's one thing where I feel the film was lacking a little bit as well, is the score was not really as memorable or as iconic or as strong as a lot of the other more resonating scenes in the film. Like, there were a lot of sequences in the movie that stood out to me, but the score just was kind of there most of the time, which I feel kind of let those scenes down a little bit. One thing that definitely wasn't a letdown, though, was the special effects, especially for the fact that a lot of the effects work was kind of done, not necessarily last minute, but with not as much money as they initially were supposed to have. So there were certain shots that had to be kind of not necessarily jerry-rigged, but they had to be adjusted for budget constraints, so to speak. And I think they did a good job doing that. Um, there are some sequences where the CGI is a little off, but for the most part, it looks pretty good, especially for 2013. And there are a fair amount of sequences where they are trying to shoot scenes on an actual set and not just behind a green screen, which was nice to see, and it definitely helped with the film's immersion factor. But the most immersive and impressive sequence involving effects is definitely the scene with the Four McQueen. When I saw that in the theater, it took my breath away and actually brought tears to my eyes because it was so well done in terms of the blend of CGI and practical makeup effects. Alec Gillis and his team outdid themselves with their creation of the Four McQueen in this film. It is honestly some of the most impressive creature effects design work that I've seen in any film. Like, it is right up there with some of the best because it looked so lifelike and so real. And that scene also brought a tear to my eye because in a lot of ways it represented not only the death of the Four McQueen, but also it reminded me of the frailty and the own potential demise of that art form, the art form of makeup special effects, which is something that is slowly dying as each day goes by in the industry because of the fact that it's being phased out by computer generated imagery. CGI is really starting to take its place, even though it's not necessarily more effective or more immersive. It's easier to do, and in some ways it's also cheaper. So that leads to a lot of the studios not really going the route of practical makeup effects. And I think it's to the detriment to a lot of these films because it really does hurt the immersion factor. And Ender's Game has an excellent immersion factor due to sequences like this with the Four McQueen, which are just absolutely jaw-dropping in terms of just how real it looks. It doesn't look like it's just a cutscene from a video game. It really does look like Ender is on an alien planet and he's discovered this alien hive and he's talking to and communicating with an actual alien. Now, the film, I think, is still relatively fast-paced despite it being almost 2 hours. I don't think it dragged that much. There are a few scenes here and there, like the whole bit where Ender quits and then goes back home and then has to have a speech from Valentine to get him to go back to school. That was a little, like, that scene was probably the moment where the film slowed down the most. But it's also a scene that I feel was kind of necessary because the film was going too fast at that point. So it kind of needed to take a breather. And I would say the pacing is really felt the most, though, in the finale during the whole simulation sequence and the stuff with the Four McQueen. Those scenes are relatively well handled and put together. It's just the way that they're set up, the way that they're stitched into the story is a little jumbled. So I think that does affect the pacing a little. But for the most part, I don't think it was that slow paced of a film. I've heard people say it was boring. I did not feel that way at all. I felt it was relatively enthralling for the most part. And yeah, I like Ender's Game. I've always liked this film. I will continue to like this film. I would love to get this in 4K actually, because I think it would actually benefit from that extra high definition. And I would recommend the movie. I really would. If you're a fan of science fiction films and you've been on the fence about this movie, I would highly recommend checking it out sometime, despite its critical reputation, because it's not that bad of a film. It really is not. It's got some good performances by Asa Butterfield and Harrison Ford. Gavin Hood does a good job writing and directing it. And it definitely has a considerable size and scope to it. The budget does seem like it's on the screen. Could it have had more big, grand spectacle in it? Sure. In fact, I think that was the plan, but they lost investors, and that led to certain moments having to be cut. And that's a shame, because I would have loved to have seen more big, grand, spectacular sequences in this movie, because the scenes that we did get were genuinely solid, and they were well done, and they were well crafted. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Ender's Game, except thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.